Of praise. You're welcome to say amen if you agree with these. First and foremost, praise God for all the trustworthy fathers in this room. Amen. And then I want to praise God for all the trustworthy fathers who encouraged all the trustworthy fathers to be in this room. Amen. Some of our fathers have passed along the way. They can't be here. They would be here if they could, but they lived such a good life and they encouraged us to be in this building, and we want to make sure that God knows that we appreciate the influence that they have had over us. But unfortunately today I'm not going to be talking about fathers. It's just the way it is. I was telling you, the schedule didn't work out, and I was telling Shelley, and she's like, yeah, well, you know, fathers understand that. And mothers don't understand that. On Mother's Day, preach a lesson on mothers, but on Father's Day, if you don't want to preach a lesson on fathers, you can probably get away with that a lot easier. So what we're doing today is we're going to continue on our theme for the year, and that is overcoming fear, or moving from fear to faith. And this week's lesson is overcoming the fear of trusting others. You ever been afraid to trust someone? Yeah? Should you be afraid of trusting some people? Absolutely, you should be afraid of trusting some people. But have you ever been leery of trusting somebody and found out later you should have been able to trust that person all along? We probably all fall in that category as well. There's somebody in our life that, hey, you know what? I was a little leery, but now that I know them, I can trust them a lot more than I did at first. So today we're going to look at sort of what we did a couple months ago in dealing with overcoming the fear of anxiety and failure. We're going to deal with, in criticism, we're going to deal with the life of David, this time focused on the relationship between David and Jonathan, because there's very few relationships in the Bible where the trust was so sound. And we're going to pick those reasons out. Why did David trust Jonathan? Why did Jonathan trust David? And I think for most of us, for all of us, this will be a good start in helping us overcome the fear of trusting other people. But I also understand that sometimes the fear of trusting people is founded on a deep level of mistrust, or something happened in the past. Although I think this lesson will still be helpful, it might not be as helpful as it will to other people. I do believe that God's Word holds a lot of, if not all, the principles we need to overcome the problems of this earth. So if what we talk about today doesn't overcome all of them, keep digging deeper into God's Word. Talk to somebody who might be able to help you further in this area if you need to. But this lesson should be a good start for all of us. There's 3 different areas we're going to talk about. First of all, if we're going to overcome our fear or move from fear to faith, the first thing that we need to do is become a trustworthy person ourselves. If we're not a trustworthy person, then what can we expect? We're part of the problem. So first of all, become a trustworthy person. Second, we need to be able to trust God with the outcomes of trusting other people. So sometimes trusting other people will be painful. But what do we know? We know God will help us through that pain when we experience that pain. And that God may have a reason for us to go through that pain so that we can help somebody else go through that pain. Whatever it is, if we're not willing to relinquish the control of all the outcomes in our life, we're never going to truly trust God, and we're never going to truly trust others. So that is an important part of it. The second point we're going to focus on today. And the third thing we're going to look at is once you do that, surround yourself with other people who do that, all right? So surround yourself with trustworthy people who trust God totally with outcomes. One of the reasons why we end up getting hurt so much is because we're trusting the wrong people. And we're trusting the wrong people because we're around the wrong people. Our pool of influence isn't trustworthy people. And if the people surrounding us aren't trustworthy, chances are we're going to get hurt. So the more we can take the time and focus on making sure that we're surrounding ourselves with people who can be trusted, the more we're going to be able to move from the fear of trusting others to actually being able to trust other people. Hope that makes sense. Glad everybody's here today. For those of you who are here and are fathers, happy Father's Day. I hope you have a wonderful and fantastic day. with or without your children, wherever they may be, or whatever makes you happiest. Being with them or without them, whatever makes you happiest. Nap time in the bedroom, peace and quiet, that's where you are, that's fine too. All right, so our first point is this. Become the kind of person others can trust. So we're going to start with a scene where David and Jonathan start this covenant relationship. But I want to bring you up to date. What's happened so far is you have most recently is they've had complete victory. Goliath's dead. They've had victory. David has come back. David has been talking to Saul, brought Goliath's head to Saul, and they've had this conversation. And so let's pick up there in 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 1. It says, "Now when they had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan took off his robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt." So you see the beginning of a relationship that is going to be founded on trust, and let's see why that was possible. What has Jonathan been going through so far? Jonathan has just witnessed, for 40 days, a giant come out and defy the armies of Israel. Once in the morning and once in the evening. So sometimes we think 40 days, we think 40 times, but it was really 80 times this has happened. And Jonathan has walked through the camp of thousands of soldiers, and as he's walked through the camp and looked at all the soldiers, there was not one soldier in that entire group of people that was trustworthy to go out and face that giant. Not a single one of them. And even when Jonathan went home and looked in the mirror or saw his reflection in the water, he still saw somebody who wasn't trustworthy to go out and to fight that giant. And so that was weighing on him. And so he recognized, I need to find someone, or we need someone who is trustworthy with this particular task. David was a person that Jonathan immediately trusted. So we're going to talk about two things here, and I want to make sure we keep this separate in our minds. Sometimes people do something where you can immediately trust them at a very high level. That doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes that does happen. You see in a moment, you see just in one action, a culmination of everything that makes that person trustworthy. But most of the time, what we do is we see trust being built up over time. And the relationship between David and Jonathan, we see both of those things, one reason why I think this is so special. We see immediately trust because of one incident, and then we see trust continuing to build and become stronger over time based upon day-to-day activities and interactions with one another. So here is why David could be trusted instantly by Jonathan and the people that were around. First of all, Jonathan saw that they could trust David because David trusted God. They knew that David trusted God. They knew that David knew that it was God that was going to be the deliverer, not David himself. David didn't go out there and taunt the giant by saying, I am the best sling shooter in the entire world, and my rock is going to come knock your head off. He went out there with confidence because he had confidence in God. And so the first important thing is you can trust people a lot more if they trust God. And that one event, that one moment was everything Jonathan needed to know that guy trusts God. Nobody else would have done that. And he didn't have to see the day-to-day interaction up to this point because that one moment spoke louder than 1,000 small actions. And could not happen unless those 1,000 small actions of day-to-day trust were being built. He didn't have to see it. He saw it in one moment, everything. And sometimes that does happen into our life, and as somebody enters into our life. People trusted David because David was real. He was the same person in private that he was in public. he makes that situation to Saul. He goes, in private, when no one was around, when I was out with the sheep, what did I do? I killed a lion and a bear. Now, in public, in front of all these people, this audience that I was not seeking is here. I'm going to act the same way in front of all these people that I acted when none of these people were around. When you see that that's what someone is deep down, they are the same person, whether anybody is there or not, you can instantly trust that person at a much deeper level than you can if you're curious or wondering, is that person real? Is he the same person behind closed doors as he is in front of other people? David proved that in one moment that he was. People trusted David because he was able to name the real issue everybody was afraid to talk about. And everybody had missed because of all this surface issues that they were focused on. You ever been in a situation where everybody is focusing on the surface issue? And this discussion is not going to solve a single thing. It's just surface issue. We need to dive down a little bit and find out what was causing all these issues. And if we can do that, the person who can do that is the most trustworthy person in the room. I don't care what your discussion is. Let's dig down a little deeper to find out what the real issue is. If I can find out the real issue is, then I am more trustworthy. I want to read this passage to you because I think this shows it. 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 26 says this. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him. This is Goliath taunting. He hasn't killed Goliath yet. What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? The problem wasn't that the Goliath was big. The real problem was that that guy is saying bad things about my God. That's the real problem. And my God can take care of all these problems. And so he knew what the real problem was. I think they would have been fine if Goliath just came out there and taunted God and say all kinds of bad things about God, but he wasn't going to hurt them. Right? So that was sort of David was like, no. I don't care what happens in the battle. We got to stop the taunting because that guy should not be saying anything about my God that sounds anything remotely like that. So David saw the real issue when nobody else saw it. People could trust David because David did not need other people's permission to do the right thing. There were no straw polls, no fingers in the wind, not going around, hey, you think I should go try to fight that giant? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Well, there wasn't to it. Can you trust people whose character is founded on other people's opinions? You can't. And if you see that in a moment, you know, let's take a step back. I can't put all my trust in that person because I see that they're most concerned with their image and other people's thought process than what is right and what is wrong. And that's what Jonathan and everybody else was able to see in that moment. David was different than everybody else. People could trust David because David overcame even the king's doubts. He didn't even let Saul, you can't go out and fight him. For most people, it's just sort of like, I'll get the credit for saying I can, but now that he's giving me this easy out and telling me I can't, I'll just agree with the king and everything will be good. No, he wasn't going to be persuaded by that. He knew what his role was. He knew that this is key. We're going to hit it again later. He knew that Saul wasn't the sovereign king of Israel, that God is the sovereign king of Israel. And nobody else knew that. Everybody else thought Saul was the king. Saul thought he was the king. Jonathan thought Saul was the king. Everybody thought Saul was the king. God is the only one who could say, David was the only one who said, no. I respect the king. God's chosen. But God is the one with the power to choose. And I will choose to follow that king before I will follow the earthly king. I think that's a huge part of that. But as most of you know who know the story, I think Jonathan had a unique perspective here because Jonathan also had one of these moments. And remember, we've studied David quite often. I love David. Most of us like studying David's life. David is substantially younger than Jonathan. It's not, they're both teenagers. Could be a 20-year gap. Earlier, before he ever knew David, Jonathan had a moment. I want to read it for you. It's 1 Samuel chapter 14 and verse 6. It says, then Jonathan said to the young man who bore his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or by few. So several years earlier, Jonathan also proved in a moment of time that he was trustworthy. But it appears at this moment, he isn't. I don't know if he's worn down by his own father. I don't know if he's worn down by just life. Have you ever been worn down by life? Have you ever wished you could be the person and had the courage and the faith that you did when you didn't know any better? You know, you just knew that all you knew was God was with you and that's all you needed to know. But then all of a sudden you've had some arrows and you've taken some bullets and you've had to bandage yourself a little bit so you're not quite as... Let's face it, sometimes we don't have the same faith we had when we were younger. And I think Jonathan sees this in David, and it brightens him up. And he says, he deserves my armor, which is a pretty significant thing. All right, so we talked about sometimes in one moment, you will have the opportunity to take a courageous action that will let people know instantly they can trust you. But that's not all David did. David then went on to show that that wasn't in vain, that you can trust me because I'm trustworthy every single day. 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 5 says it this way. 1 Samuel chapter 18 and verse 5. So David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. And Saul set him over the men of war, and he was accepted in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So David, and this is what happens sometimes. Let me go ahead and read this. Jonathan trusted David because David was trustworthy every day, not just in the big moment. I'm not going to ask anybody here if you've been guilty of this. I'm assuming nobody here would ever do this. But sometimes people think that if they're there in the big moments, they don't have to be there in the little moments. And somehow the big moments can make the little moments not as important. Does that make sense? It might be somebody who is just a great gift giver. I mean, they give great gifts. A guy who might give the most beautiful necklace in the world, and every other woman wanted that necklace, and she got it, but every day he's not there to be the kind of husband he needs to be. He's thinking, I can just sort of give in the big moments, but then I can just sort of skate in the everyday life. That wasn't David's view. David's view was, I will be there for God in the big moments, but I will also be there for God in the small moments. So every single time he was sent to battle, what did he do? He was faithful. And eventually everybody around saw that, and they praised David because of that. But it wasn't just David that proved his faithfulness every single moment in this relationship. Jonathan did as well. So I'm going to go through these quickly. I have the verses there if you want to read those later. Jonathan also proved consistently trustworthy over time. First of all, he initiated the covenant immediately upon seeing what David did. He didn't go ask for his dad's permission, as far as we know. He didn't do the poll either. He didn't think about this. He just knew that guy deserves this. I'm giving it to him. So he shows the same kind of instant decision-making process as David did. He interceded for David with Saul at personal risk to himself. So every time he does this, what does this do in the bank account of trust that he has in David's life? Every time David sees him do this, he starts trusting Jonathan more. So it goes back and forth, back and forth. He told David the truth about his father's intentions. You know what? You were right. My dad is trying to kill you, and I don't want you to be dead. And so he goes behind his father's back in a very risky plan to tell David that his father is trying to kill him, because it was the right thing to do. He knew David didn't deserve it. Most people don't put themselves at risk for other people. Jonathan did. That's why he was trustworthy to David. He stood up to Saul publicly in front of everybody else, telling in the palace, saying, you know, you have no right to be mad at David. He didn't do anything wrong. That was a bold move on his part, to tell the king, his father, Dad, you're wrong here about David. And that made David trust him even more. He absorbed his father's wrath and a spear thrown at him rather than abandoning David. I love that, the way that, just think about that process. He absorbed Saul's anger and wrath instead of abandoning David. That is a great way to picture the idea that he could be trusted because he was willing to absorb his own pain or risk in order to protect someone who he knew was faithful to his father. And he told his father that David has done nothing wrong, Dad. He has only had your best interest at heart over and over and over again. You're not seeing this correctly. He honored the covenant even when it was inconvenient. He goes out to the wilderness and meets with David, strengthens David, tells David, I know you're going to be king. My father knows you're going to be king. Everybody knows you're going to be king. He didn't see the picture perfectly because God didn't tell him, because he thought he was going to be beside David when David was king, and we know that did not turn out that way. He subordinated his own claim to the throne because he knew the throne belonged to David. That's huge. As a matter of fact, that's why Saul threw the spear at him and called Jonathan bad names. You son of a perverse woman, and threw a spear at him. But he absorbed that because the truth is the truth, and I'm going to do the right thing regardless of the consequences to me. And then he strengthened David's hand in God rather than in himself. So David, God is the one that made you king. God is the one that declared this. He could have gone to David and said, David, you've proven it. You're a good man. You're powerful. You're strong. That wouldn't have been a faithful thing to do for David. David needed to remember God has anointed you as king. And you're a king, and you do these things because God is your king, and you trust in him. But listen to me, and this doesn't apply to every time we can't trust anybody. And it doesn't apply to every situation in which we are fearing to step out and trust people, but it is the one that we can examine right now in our own hearts and we can think about this week. Sometimes our fear of trusting others says more about us than about them. We project our own untrustworthiness to other people who are trustworthy. And therefore, we're afraid to trust them when the reality is, we just know they should be afraid of trusting us. And so we assume we should be afraid of trusting them. We can stop that. We can become more trustworthy ourselves so that we know people can trust us and we know we can trust other people. And if I don't, I'll just put it this way, if I don't make sure I'm trustworthy to you, I'm part of the problem. So I have to start being a trustworthy person in the little moments and the big moments in order for us as a group to overcome our fear of moving from fear to faith. You know, I could be the obstacle of that happening if I don't become a trustworthy person. I hope that makes sense. That's not where we want to put this sometimes, because it's much better to put it all on you guys, right? I can't trust anybody because they're not trustworthy. But when I have to realize they can't trust me because I'm not trustworthy, that's a little harder to take. That's a little more painful to think about. But I think it was Tim I was talking to after a couple sermons ago, maybe it was last week. The one thing that we can do is we can control whether we're trustworthy or not. I can't control whether you're trustworthy or not, but I can make a difference in if I'm trustworthy or not. I can change me. And if I change me and you change you as a group, we're going to be a lot better off. And God's going to be a lot better off as well. So, first, we aren't trustworthy sometimes. Second, David could trust God deeply enough to loosen his grip on the outcomes. Think about this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were good at that, right? What did they say? We don't care about the outcome. Whether God saves us from the fire or not, whether we live or die, it's not the outcome that matters to us. We're going to be trustworthy to God in this particular moment. And that's the way David was, and that's the way Jonathan was, and that's the way we need to be. Here's the verse that says where David was. And 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 8, therefore, notice them. They're coming together now because David knows that Saul wants to kill him, but Jonathan doesn't. And David is actually trying to convince Jonathan, your father's trying to kill me, and Jonathan says, no way. My father would tell me if he was trying to kill you. He's not trying to kill you. But listen to what David says. Therefore you shall deal kindly with your servant, For you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Nevertheless, if there is iniquity in me, kill me yourself. For why should you bring me to your father? Think about that. Jonathan, I trust you enough with this decision. If you think there's iniquity in me, if you think I'm not faithful to your father, let's not go to your father. We don't need to go to your father. You just kill me right here on the spot. You know, we experience these moments sometimes when we read these stories and we look at these stories. This one was so powerful to me this week, to be looking at another human being and saying, I give you the power of life and death over me, and I'm okay with that. Because I trust myself that I am faithful, and I trust you that you can see that. So I don't need a jury of 12 peers. You're the only one. That's how much I trust you. And what was Jonathan's response to that? I know you're trustworthy, David. I would never do anything like that to you. And then he goes on and does this. David trusted God and Jonathan enough to loosen his grip on whether he lived or died. 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 41, it says, as soon as the lad had gone, this is the thing that they had examined. And if you're not familiar with this story, just read these few chapters. You're going to be in awe of how this story has gone. So as soon as the lad had gone, David arose from a place toward the south, fell on his face toward the ground, bowed down 3 times, and they kissed one another, and they wept together, but David more so. Then Jonathan said to David, go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, may the Lord be between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. So he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. This isn't the outcome that either of these men wanted. Neither of these men wanted to separate. But Jonathan had enough faith to say, we're going to separate, and we're both going to be okay because we both trust God. We've made a covenant, and we know that God is going to be between our descendants forever. So even though we're not going to be side by side, at least for now, God's going to be between us. And the distance won't matter. And God's going to be between my descendants and your descendants. I trust that. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understandings. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Psalm 37, 3 through 5 says, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the Lord and feed on his faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Why could David and Jonathan trust each other? Is because they both lived these principles out every single day. They trusted God enough to loosen their grasp on the outcomes and say, God, whatever the outcome is, we're okay with that. We're going to do what you want us to do. And we have confidence that the other one is going to as well. So our third point is this. Surround yourself with trustworthy people and let them in. I am here to tell you that you really can't fully trust most people that you interact with. And God doesn't expect you to. Trust isn't blind. Trust is earned, right? And so God doesn't say, Christians, you just go out and trust everybody under all circumstances. He actually tells us, test the spirits, right? To make sure they're of God. And let's look at a couple other passages that we see this really playing out in real life. We'll start with David and Jonathan. 1 Samuel chapter 23 and verse 14. And David stayed in the strongholds in the wilderness, and he remained in the mountains in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. So David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a forest. Then Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that. So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went to his own house. David could trust Jonathan because Jonathan accepted God's plan that he was not going to be king, David was. Jonathan knew who was the sovereign king. David knew who was the sovereign king. Saul did not know. Because Saul did not know, did he have a hard time trusting people? He didn't even trust trustworthy people. People who had proven themselves over and over and over again, because he did not understand who God really was. Saul lived in fear and anxiety because he refused to surround himself with trustworthy people, or to at least acknowledge that the people around me are trustworthy. David is trustworthy. My own son is trustworthy. And they are not trustworthy to me only, but more importantly, they are trustworthy in God's eyes. Which is a huge point here. Because I would much rather surround myself with people God trusts than people that I trust. Because if God trusts them, they're trustworthy. If I trust them, you know what? It's my best judgment, but it's not always right. Acts chapter 9. Saul is trying to kill Christians. And we won't go into all the details here. You can read this passage. Saul of Tarsus is trying to kill Christians. He is going down to Damascus to kill them. And then God tells Ananias, go talk to the Christian killer. All right? What was Ananias's justified and reasonable response? God, he's trying to kill Christians. I'm scared of you going to talk to Saul. Is that reasonable? I think it's very reasonable. Did God know that was reasonable? Yes. God didn't blast him for this. God just had reminded him of something else. It's going to be okay, I say so. Now, where's Ananias? If God says, yeah, I know that, just go anyway. You'll be all right. Now what is his response? Okay. You know, so the key issue here, God expects us to be cautious about whom we trust. Ananias trusted God enough to go even when he didn't trust Paul or Saul at this particular time. Sometimes we take relationship risks not because we know the other person is trustworthy, but because we know God is. And I think that's true in a local church. We trust one another, not because all of us have always been faithfully trustworthy in our entire lives. Nobody in this room. That's one of the things that make the people in this room so great. Because we all recognize we have failed. And we've tried to make amends for that, but we all recognize and point each other to the one who will never fail. And if we do fail, I think we own that. And I know that if you hurt me, it's not because you wanted to. It's not because you set your heart to hurt me. It's because you're human just like I'm human. And we can talk about that. And we can heal from that. And I can do that not because we're all trustworthy, because this is the church in the way that God put this together so that we have trustworthy people to hang out with, to spend time with, to share our life with. And yes, I'll be honest with you. I've been hurt by Christians too. You know, that's life. But I can't bring that into my relationship with you. That's not fair. And you can't bring that in your relationship with me because that's not fair either. I haven't done anything to hurt you, and you haven't done anything to hurt me. We can't always go back and relive and take everything from our past, every hurt, every incident, and throw it on everybody else we meet. If we do that, we're never going to trust anyone. And that's not God's plan. Let God deal with that burden. And we need to learn how to move on sometimes. And then in Acts chapter 9, all right, it's one thing, Ananias, he didn't want to go because he didn't trust Saul. Well, what did the Christians in Jerusalem want to do when Paul was like, hey, Paul's coming, he'd like to meet with us? I mean, the Christian killer is coming to PSD. We would be like, oh, wait a minute here, we're going to lock the doors and not let him in. And that's and is that reasonable? I think that's reasonable too. And I think God knows that's reasonable from a human perspective, and he wasn't mad at them for having that thought. Remember, look at everything through God's grace. God understands what that's like. And so God is able to say, okay, I get it. I get that you don't want Saul to come. I know he's changed. He knows he's changed, but you don't know he's changed. But what does he do? It's Barnabas that has to come down and vouch for Paul's change. Sometimes a trusted person will put their own reputation on the line to vouch for someone else. That's what Barnabas did for Paul. And sometimes that might be what we need to do for someone else. But I put this little caveat here. Don't do it lightly. Okay, don't go vouching for everybody, okay? You might want everybody to be trustworthy. But the moment I tell you that person's trustworthy and they're not, who also becomes untrustworthy? I do. And so you have to be careful not to use that. Just a small section here. We're not going to go. You can read all these practical applications. I'm just going to give you the highlights here. Ask yourself the honest question, am I a trustworthy person? Am I trustworthy in the big moments? Am I trustworthy in the small moments? Every single day of my life, am I trustworthy in these small moments to God and to others? You can do that. You don't need anybody else's help, permission, or anything like that. You can ask permission or help from your spouse, but you don't need it. And if you find out that you're not, don't start with Goliath, okay? Start with something very small tomorrow morning to show that you can be faithful and trustworthy to someone else. If you've broken a relationship, and you've already apologized, but you haven't proven that you've changed, just start changing. And don't expect yourself to change overnight. Do something small. Take a small step. That's all I'm asking. Be honest with yourself about your fear. Is this rooted in a real experience? Okay? Did someone genuinely hurt me? Am I having a hard time processing this? Because you also don't want to blame yourself for something somebody else did. If it's something that you're not trustworthy and you're projecting your own trustworthiness on someone else, that's real, that happens. Deal with it. But if that's not the case, be honest with what's causing you to not trust people and deal with the real issue. What we talk about David? David saw the real issue. He didn't see the surface issues. We need to be able to do that well. Find your Jonathan. Find the person. Fortunately for a lot of us, our spouses are our Jonathans. We can trust our spouses 100%, no questions asked. They have our best interest. We have 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, whatever of experience to show that. Thank God for that we have that. Be someone else's Barnabas. Again, not everybody else's Barnabas. But be somebody else's Barnabas if it's warranted. And then, if you are in the audience this morning and unlike what we put in the bulletin, ideally, your father should be your earthly father should be your first example of how to trust and be the safest person in the entire world on learning to trust. If that wasn't true for you, it wasn't true for Jonathan either. And he overcame it because he found his David and he recognized God was his real father. And so that's a solution. If you've had a father that wasn't trustworthy, that's a terrible thing. I can't even put it in words. But look at Jonathan as an example of how to make the shift in your mind. My father wasn't trustworthy. I had to go around him because he wasn't trustworthy. But I found David, and I know God is trustworthy. I'm going to turn away from my father. Sometimes that's healthy, and turn to God as my only father now. So here's the invitation. If God is not your father, you don't need to delay that, okay? He's wanting to adopt you, as Brian talked about. He wants to be your father. Come to him. He's asked us to do that. He's invited everybody. He's told us how to do that. If you don't know, we can study with you. If you know that one of the things that he expects, the moment that you go from the devil's kingdom to God's kingdom, from darkness to light, out of Christ into Christ, is the moment you're immersed in water. You give it all up to God and says, I want to be your child now. You can do that right now, and we ask you to do that as we stand and sing.